All right. Now we have Christopher Guess, who's an RJI residential fellow at the University of Missouri, who has been studying and researching, obviously, mobile for media, as you can see, and he's going to talk to us about a platform that he's been developing. Christopher.
Thank you. Is the mic on? Yeah, okay, great. Hi. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Christopher Guess. I am the RJI residential fellow. The University of Missouri School of Journalism. The real title's a lot longer, but we're not going to get into that. So previously to this, and this gets into the platform I'm about to talk about, I was a Knight International Journalism Fellow working with a group called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project in Sarajevo, Bosnia, but really across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. A lot of frequent flyer miles. And so what OCCRP is a umbrella group of about 30 different investigative centers, usually small, sometimes maybe 4 or 5 journalists in the case of Moldova. And they sort of bring everybody together. They build tools, they do their own reporting, of course, but they also really facilitate the cross-border stuff. So I was making friends with a lot of these organizations. I was seeing the problems that they were trying to face, and I recognized basically a similar problem in the U.S., across Europe. Journalists, especially small places, really have the same problem. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. So the current state of mobile news. We've been talking about it for the last 2 days. You guys are pretty well aware. I'm not going to get into a lot of statistics. There are people far better and more qualified than me, like just previously, to talk about that. So I'm just going to talk about the daily stuff that we have to deal with. So the current status is mobile optimized sites. This is an argument that we've been having back and forth all day and all day yesterday. Mobile optimized site versus native app, et cetera. Well, you'll see where I stand on this. Especially if you're a small or medium-sized news organization, you're often really tethered to social media. We've seen in the statistics. If you're not on Snapchat, if you're not on Facebook, if you're not on Instagram, you're not anywhere. Now the problem with that is, especially if you don't have 300,000 readership, at least, really, you basically have to pay to play on these systems. So you already have a limited budget, and for people to actually see, people aren't paying you for subscription anymore. You're paying Facebook so that they see your stories and hopefully click on it, and hopefully you get some ad revenue. If you're a small newsroom, you might not also be publishing enough every day. I have a little sort of metric. Basically, if you're waiting in line for the bathroom at a bar, you want people to open your app and they want to see new content. If you can't provide them with new content, they're not going to open it up a second time. They're not going to open it up while waiting on the platform for the train in the morning. They're not going to do it before their boss shows up 5 minutes late for a meeting. People want to see new content. And if they don't, they're not going to come back. A lot of these places also attempt crowdfunding. It's needed, but it's really hard. So my theory is mobile apps, native ones. I call it the holy grail, maybe, hopefully. We got to try something, right? OK, now the problem with them, as Aaron put very succinctly yesterday, is that they are expensive and very confusing to actually build. If you're a little local newsroom, you don't have the effort, right? Because they're going to cost you $30,000 to $50,000 per platform, iOS versus Android, because it's going to take you 6 months, at least, per app. That's not to mention that if you change your CMS, you have to redo most of your work. You have to hire developers, and developers are a huge pain in the ass. They are hard to manage. They will not understand your needs, and you won't understand a word they're saying half the time, right? And a good third of them are just taking you for a ride anyways. I know that because I am one. OK, so I decided to start looking around. These screenshots are maybe 2 years old, but basically the same. So you have our friends at The Guardian, The Times, and Der Spiegel, and Le Monde, and El País, and Times of India, and the South China Morning Post. And they all look and do the same stuff. Essentially, we're at the same stage that we were before WordPress. And I sort of hate analogies like this, but if you guys remember before WordPress, if you wanted to set up a publication, you were going to be hiring developers, developing a custom CMS, managing it, basically the same state of affairs that mobile apps are currently in. And then WordPress came out, and all of a sudden everybody had a publishing platform because you could set up in 5 minutes, because basically those CMSs were reinventing the wheel every single minute. And that's the state of most mobile apps. Yeah, sure, there's some extra features here and there, and some have calendars and such things. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of what a lot of these organizations need, a lot of your organizations need, it's pretty much the same stuff. So I called this project Push. I decided to fix it. I decided to write something that could come in between there. I have had this slide in here for a long time. That logo was subject to change in 2015. I don't know, maybe it will someday if I can get an actual designer. Okay, but this is what it looks like. This is, I'll show a demo in a few minutes, but this is Made on TV. It's an Azerbaijani news organization. Last I heard, this is currently the only source of uncensored news in the entire country. They've blocked all the main websites, but the app still gets through, which is fantastic. So, probably wondering, what can it do? You think it's a, complicated mess, but what it actually does is it does exactly what you expect it to do. So you can read your current headlines, you can read your most recent stories, you can sort your stories by categories if you want, if your site supports that. The video player built in, which I'm actually very proud of. I spent a lot of time on getting the timing right on those. The search. So if you have search on your site, search in the app. You can share your articles on social media, of course. Supports multiple languages at a time. So when I was building this for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, you often have stories published in, say, Serbian and English, or Serbian and Russian, and such things. So they needed to be able to separate it into multiple languages. You can do that. I'm going to get into the proxy features in a second. I'm working on some really cool anti-censorship stuff. Can cache all the articles offline for reading. So when you get on a plane, you get on a train, you go underground, you get home and you don't have cell service anymore, you can still continue reading like you would expect. And it does push notifications out of the gate, which is really fantastic, I think, personally. That's sort of why I called it Push. You can send your users directly the stories. This is really great if you're one of those small news organizations that's not publishing every day. Your goal is just to get them to download and open it once and click yes for notifications, and now you can hit them every time. You might not be publishing every day or every week, but when you do, you can start really reaching out to the customers and your readers in a very direct manner, because I know a lot of us in the room, myself included, turn off a lot of news notifications, but my parents have no idea how to turn off notifications, and they sort of love it, right? So we got to remember that a lot of these things are not just for us, but for other people as well. And people love that itch in their pockets. It's been shown to release, a nice little hit of dopamine every time you get it. You can also solicit in-app donations. So thank you for reading our story yesterday. We're working on part 2. Would you like to give us $5 to continue that? Analytics are built in. I rolled them myself. They're really pretty. It also has support for things like Flurry. Also, you can run one-off campaigns. This is something that not a lot of the organizations have been using, but you can time out sort of campaigns. So if you're running a project, and it will actually, you can link straight from the app into a mobile web view, which allows you to expand the app when you need to without having to rebuild the whole darn thing. Okay, so I wanted to expand this, but the actual system is much larger, but as far as y'all are concerned, there's 3 parts. There's the CMS backend. So this is not its own CMS. A lot of people get a little bit confused in that they think it's like a whole new news management system. It's not. It tacks into the one you already have. In fact, if you're running WordPress, there is a plugin that I wrote, literally 30 seconds to get up and running if you're on a WordPress plugin. You just install the plugin, you click activate, everything happens for you automatically. I did a lot of these features because I've been rolling this out to news organizations for the last couple of years, and I just get tired of redoing everything. I had a checklist of literally, I think it was up to 35 points I needed to make, so I decided to automate it all. So you have the CMS backend, and in the middle, you have the push server. This is a small, and for the techs in the room, it's a Ruby on Rails server, runs anywhere that you want it to. And I'll get into the tech on that later. Then you have the Android apps, and you have the iPhone and iPad apps. So it's fully native on both iOS and Android, and it's completely feature parity, which is even better. So this is what the push server does. And again, I'm sorry, I'm just going through these features, but I think it's really cool. So it integrates with a bunch of different CMSs. I'm putting in Town News's blocks right now. If you guys are familiar with that, it's a couple thousand news something like 1,000 news organizations in the US use it, usually small and medium-sized ones. I'm specifically implementing it for the Columbian Missourian, which I think is a publication a lot of people here are probably maybe intimately familiar with. You can deploy it on any cloud provider. So if you guys use Amazon, great. If you use Google, fine. If you use Heroku, works on that too. Works everywhere. It's really nice. It's fully encrypted by default. So there's a lot of talk about moving sites to HTTPS and all that. I'm sure you've been in your newsrooms. This does it automatically. Literally just works. And it's free. You don't need to pay for the certs or anything. It's, again, just taking care of myself. For your IT department, there's tons of scripts to manage it automatically. They don't need to mess with a bunch of settings. Everything, all the defaults are standard, and of course they can if they want to get weird with it, but mostly it takes care of itself. Full user management, usernames, passwords, so people can log in, you can revoke access, view your analytics, obviously. And the push notification management is all done on this. It's really simple. And the nice thing about the push notifications is if you support multiple languages, you can send out notifications just to the people with that language turned on. So if you do English and Spanish, and people are, some people are only reading your articles ever in Spanish, then they'll only get the Spanish push notifications. So why would you want to use this? So the fast setup time, you got about a week, and if it's me doing it, a couple hours, instead of 6+ months of development time. Now this is a little bit, there's some issues with Apple's bureaucratic stuff getting everything set up properly, but technically this is all it takes. How long it takes you to get an Apple developer account is a whole other business, but there's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately. The whole thing's open source. This is not some proprietary system that I built to get rich off of. All the code's available. It's on GitHub, if you guys know that. And you can take it, you can modify it, and you can improve it yourself. In fact, that's one of my main goals at RJI this year, is to actively build a community of developers around this so that I'm not the only one sitting there working on it. And I know for a fact that OCCRP in Sarajevo is specifically hiring a developer just to work on push. So that's going to be great. There's institutional support behind this. I'm always adding features, which is awesome. And it's just a lot more stable, and it's a lot faster than a website. Getting people to type in your website into a mobile browser is not ever going to happen, as we've heard from many other speakers over the last 2 days. And something like this means they don't have to. And we already talked about the push notifications, but it really, it does work. You can look at the graphs and see like a major uptick in response when people start receiving them. So who's using it? Okay. So we got OCCRP. So what I didn't mention is that this is not some pie in the sky thing. This has been in production for over 1.5 years with all these organizations, often handling 5,000 plus monthly readers at least. So made on TV. Bevel in Bulgaria, who's great. Rise Project in Romania. Rise Moldova. Creek in Serbia, they are the ones getting over 5,000 hits a week. It's amazing. Sin, Serbia. Kiev Post in Ukraine. That one actually sort of floundered out, but not because of me, unfortunately. And I'm actually doing a lot more. I'm launching it with 4 news organizations in New Jersey as part of Montclair State University's New Jersey News Commons initiative. So we're giving it to for small organizations out there for free, which is great because I love moving into the US market. So I'm always working on adding new stuff. My time is unfortunately limited, but these are some of the new features that I'm really working on. So want to make it easier. And if you have any ideas, please let me know. Okay, so for some of the technical details, it's Java. For Android, it's Objective-C. For iOS, we're not using PhoneGap. We're not using anything like that. None of those little shortcuts that you keep getting. I mentioned that it's all in Ruby on Rails. If you're a server person, it's completely Dockerized, which means one little line and everything comes up and running, which is great. The CMS plugins are all custom written by me. They don't depend on like third-party stuff. So if someone else decides to stop supporting something, we don't break. And that's the GitHub, if you're interested. Okay, a bunch of people pulled out their phones, so I'll give you a second on that. Okay. Or you can just come see me afterwards. Okay, so one of the cool new features that I'm really working on, and I hope it's okay if I talk about this to you guys. It's not very US-centric right now. Hopefully never, but we'll see how that goes. So one of the main problems with, especially if you're small or medium across, outside of the US, is you have to deal with censorship, state level specifically. It's a huge problem. It's coming up in the UK even. And if you're trying to publish, you're subject to this. Your readers won't even know what you have. And this is something that's actively happening to a lot of my colleagues. And one of the main reasons that I built this. So I decided about, I guess it was last December, to start looking into ways that the push app can sort of work on this problem without the users needing to know it. One of the big problems with things like Tor and such things is that they're very, very difficult for normal people to use. I'm sure you've all tried. You all did it wrong. I'm 100% positive you did it wrong because I screwed up all the time too. If you ever put in a single piece of personally identifiable information into Tor, you're not anonymous anymore. Yay. And VPNs, while they can work, are also complex. People have to pay for them. And getting a grandmother in Azerbaijan to get into that is just not really an option. So I put up this map. I was going to start coloring in maps where there's state sponsorship, but then I realized it just started to turn completely green, so I just left it all gray because it's happening literally everywhere. The US, we're sort of getting around it right up until net neutrality gets voted in at the end of November, in which case Comcast will be doing it for us. Okay, so a little bit about how the internet works. I'm not sure what the level of technical skill is in the room, so I'm just going to go over a couple of these things. People always talk about, the internet going up to space. It doesn't go up to space. The internet, 99% of the stuff that you're ever going to use on the internet is going through these cables. They're across the world. Facebook and Google just put up a brand new one in between New York and Paris or something like that, to the tune of $5 billion. But this is actually what the internet looks like. It's not satellites. It's not what Louis C.K. said on Conan all those years ago. And the problem with this is that everything's connected. So if you're downlink of one of these, and say Egypt starts doing things, well, if you're over here, you're going to start getting affected as well. And there's a bunch of different ways that they can do this. So you can take the Syrian and North Korean route, and you could just, metaphorically or sometimes literally take an axe to a cable coming out of the sea. You can do simple keyword blocking like the United Kingdom is doing these days with porn, where you have to opt out of state-sponsored censorship when you sign up for your internet access. And something like 30% of people are, okay, then it's something like that, don't even know that you can. So they just start getting into some really weird stuff. And I was at Heathrow once and I was trying to look at a photojournalism essay and got, the UK government has determined that this site is, not relevant. I'm like, it's a photo essay on Newsweek. So you get caught. Can get into some of the more dangerous stuff. like China and Russia, where they start looking at every single packet. There's not a lot you can do about that, but we can try. And then there's the favorite of dictators everywhere, the DNS poisoning, where you essentially just redirect every website to a certain domain. Nicely, it's easy to get around. So what are the ways that we get around this? So some of you, I'm sure, have seen how you can change your DNS settings on your phone, on your computer. You can use Google's, you can use OpenDNS, which works, but again, technically not feasible for most people. You can do, for keyword blocking and deep packet inspection, you can use a VPN. But it can be blocked if the VPN's discovered. You know, if there's like one that everybody in the country uses, which tends to happen a lot, then the government can just sort of shut that down. And when it comes to Tor, as I mentioned before, it's effective if done properly. It's never done properly. And it's more difficult to block, but still possible. China's been doing it more and more recently. So if there's and if there's a cut cable, there's a couple different things you can do. You can set up like really strong towers. You can bring in satellites and such things, but it gets a little bit difficult. So this is actually from the, we were talking about, I just mentioned DNS. This is from Gezi Park in Turkey in 2013, when they literally just spray painted the DNS addresses on the side of the wall and told people how to get around the government blocking. So some of this is easy, some of this is very complex. So I decided to figure out a way to do this properly. So the goals that I saw it was that it needed to be stupidly simple for people. People needed to barely even know that it was happening. The less they know, the better, because it tends to freak people out. And it really shouldn't change the user interface. Nothing should, scare someone. Nothing should make them turn it off. Nothing should do anything like that. And to get around some things, what I decided not to do is make anonymity important. So knowing that people are using it is not something that I'm all that worried about. What I'm worried about is making sure that they get the information, because these governments, for the most part, with a couple rare exceptions that I'm not really dealing with, don't go after the readers of the organization. They decide, they're more interested in putting a bomb under somebody's car, like we saw this last week in Malta, unfortunately. So as long, if it gets out, they're fine with that, but they don't want people producing it. So we need to get around that. And of course, because every state and every country does things a little differently, it has to be opt-in per organization. You don't want somebody accidentally in Turkmenistan putting up an app that, gets themselves and actually all their customers thrown in jail. The nice thing about all this is that you might be wondering, like, oh, they blocked the app, so therefore, you can't download it. That's not usually true, because these countries don't usually have a whole lot of control over what Apple and Google put in their respective stores. So the app is often still available. It just, comes up as, connection error when you actually try to log in. But so if we can put the tooling into the system and get around it, we can still distribute. Now, the nice thing about the app is that little middleware actually does make it more difficult to censor in the first place, because it's a whole separate IP address and domain name that you have to block. And since nobody ever types it into a browser, a lot of states sort of forget that it exists, which is actually the current case in Azerbaijan. They're just literally too incompetent to be able to fix it, which is, I'm fine with. But that's not going to be the case for everything. And so I decided to look into this. And I'm going to show you a demo of the app, and also I'll do a little demo of the anti-censorship stuff real quick too. So, okay, so this, y'all can see that? Cool. Nothing's on my desktop. That's weird. It's messy as heck though. So this is what, of course my computer decides to freeze. This is what the app looks like. Let's restart it. For Android, it's fully supported back to 4.3, which, while not a big issue in the US, outside of the States, many new phones are still sold with 3-year versions of Android. So a lot of the modern apps that people are building are completely useless to a lot of these people. So this is it. it's a news app. Yay. You can click in. This is a horrible, sad story. Oh, on the simulator, sometimes it doesn't show the text, but this always works on the mobile, promise. There's a video, which is fun. You can share, of course. You can switch your various languages. So there's Russian, search, everything like that. Now, what I can do, and again, I don't know how much y'all actually care about this, but I can basically put in my own DNS block. Just trust that I am. Essentially, this is what Turkey did that day. I can restart the app. This Route 40 News is the new one from New Jersey that I'm putting up. So it'll launch. I hope. This is very much a beta feature. There we go. So this is all that comes up for a user when we're fixing their network problem, which means if you're a techie, you can see down here spinning up all the Tor stuff. And it'll come up, and it works automatically without anybody ever having to even know what's going on. And it's going a little slow today because, I don't know, the Wi-Fi or something. But the stories are still visible and still readable, and you can reload them and everything like that. Okay, so that's what I've been working on. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that to build these apps, you literally set a config file. A couple photos, some colors you like, set it pointed to the right address. You run a script, and it spits it out completely. We'll even upload it to the app stores for you. So these are some of the challenges that I'm trying to think through when we're talking about censorship of news media and how mobile apps can work on it. The testing is the real hard part because you can't really go to a lot of these countries. Nobody really publishes exactly what they do. You'd think there'd be a lot of academic research on this, but I and the student that I'm currently working with are having some problems finding it. Not to mention that the gear to actually emulate it is extremely expensive and is often limited to institutions. So every time I try to call Cisco just to get a price point, they're like, oh, who are you working with? Who's your main IT contact? Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, crap, I'm going to be getting phone calls for the rest of my life from this. And security folks are nerdy as heck, and it's really hard to get into their good graces sometimes and find yourself interested in what they actually want to talk about. But OK, so that's the end of my presentation. That's Push. That's the system I've been working on. I guess we have time for questions, if anybody has any. Cool. OK, thanks, guys. Nobody? Nothing? Awesome. Thank you. I guess that's 15 minutes in.